Hesse's novels created for me a world that I aspired to, but I didn't understand in any way at that time in the 60s. It just fitted in with the flashes of wisdom that would come with an acid trip or whatever.
Hi, everyone. It's Raghu back with the original, the OG of Mindrolling, David Silver, which is always a big uplift for me. David.
I'm laughing because, I was the OG on this with you. And we thought we really went through a lot of names for this podcast before we got to this one.
Yeah. Oh my God. Didn't we? Wildly fun stuff. But hey everybody, those early podcasts with David are really cool because we were, maybe we were a little less pro, although both of us had been in one way and the other in broadcasting. So it wasn't like we weren't used to, doing the kinds of things that we've done with each other and just being able to address different topics and themes in a way that's entertaining, we hope, as well as informative. It's been a long road to here. So I'm always happy to have David back. And
I'm happy to be here. I mean, really, I am.
Or as Keith Richards says, when he went on a show and someone said, "Keith, we're so happy to have you here," and he said, "I'm happy to be anywhere."
No, particularly now as they're touring.
Look at him now; this is crazy. Do you see Jagger? First of all, he sounds pretty well much as good as he used to. I mean, he's projecting. He's not. He can hit the notes and whatever, and then dancing and doing that crazy shit he's been doing.
We octogenarians will do that on occasion.
Oh, I see.
When we get really totally depressed, jump up and dance like Jagger with Jagger's moves. I do it. No, it is amazing that they're there, and it just proves that constructs about aging are largely, individuated. They're not true, most of them. We're not all like drooling. Maybe he drools backstage, but I doubt it. But it's, the idea of the elders being something to sort of avoid talking about in our culture. I hate to get into it right away, but it's true. We in ancient cultures where it worked, everybody lived together, and the older ones were the ones that gave the word. And that isn't really strictly speaking true, but we'll try today.
We'll try, yeah. So we do these little episodes called "Just Ask the Experts." The experts. Ask the experts. You can't even say the damn thing. And, they know nothing, meaning us. But we're, amateur sleuths kind of, and really kind of take something apart and see if it has any relevance for all of us in our day-to-day lives. And
you have to be careful. There's a fine line between, eclectic and dilettante. So stay on the side of eclectic.
Yes, okay.
Self-worth.
Yeah. So David was just naturally came upon this very seminal figure from this for us that we discovered in the 60s. Was part of the whole psychedelic and Eastern Asian revolution. And so I thought, wow, yeah, this would be somebody really cool. Hermann Hesse.
Correctly, I think. Hermann Hesse, yeah.
Well, he was from Austria, right?
Well, he was born in Germany in 1877 and lived a long life till 1962. Hermann Hesse wrote numerous novels and papers and everything. And I came across it via a website blog, but the word blog bothers me. It reduces it somehow. It's a terrific
these
site.
days.
Yeah, called Marginalia. And it's all the work of a marvelous writer and critic and everything, a Bulgarian woman called Maria Popova. I hope it's Popova, not Popova, but I'd never heard anyone say her name, so I think it's Popova. She's Bulgarian. She moved to the United States. She has amazing credentials. At MIT, she was a fellow of something they call Futures of Entertainment. Whatever that is.
Really?
Very interesting. And she had a thing, as you know, Raghu, called Brain Pickings, which she started in 2006, and then changed it to Marginalia in 2021. And I got there because of my dear friend Randy Coleman, my dearest friend Randy, who sent it to me and reads it on a weekly basis. And her daughter, Flynn Coleman, turned her onto it. And Flynn Coleman, if you're watching, you'll see this book, A Human Algorithm. Flynn wrote that book, and it is a marvelous book about AI. But she wrote it like 5 or 6 years ago.
Wow.
And it's still incredibly crucial, this book, because it tells us how to humanize this and not be scared of it. And it's complex, and she's a brilliant writer and a TED speaker, TED Talk. And I just wanted to acknowledge that she's the origin of knowing about marginalia and Maria Popova. I called Raghu and said that Hermann Hesse would be, well, you liked it immediately. You didn't give me much of an argument about it. Would be interesting because he was one of the icons of the 60s, one of the unlikely ones, given that he was an old person by 1960, died in 62. But a lot of people who were in the psychedelic realm and people who were listening to, Joni Mitchell and Jefferson Airplane and the Beatles and so forth, this was just like that. Hermann Hesse was another part of that 60s zeitgeist, and a very important one because of his wisdom and his background. He went to India, actually, Raghu, in 1911. He took his Journey to the East, which is a book he wrote, and became not just an intellectual giant, which he was, but a person of deep spiritual seeking and explaining and exploring. So there was a sort of a coming together of something that was very appealing to us in the 60s, which was moving away from the intellectual and into the heart space, and hopefully into spiritual exploration of all kinds. And he was part of that and inspired a lot of us by his novels, Siddhartha and Steppenwolf, Magister Ludi, Damien, many of them. And I thought, Raghu, that today we would concentrate a little bit on 2 shorter ones, Journey to the East and Siddhartha, because I find Siddhartha to be a map of emotional change and, to quote Mr. Jagger Richards, emotional rescue. That's what the book to me is about. A spiritual search that resulted in enormous changes. It's a slightly confusing book, Raghu, as we've talked about offline, because it's about Siddhartha, and it's about
which is the name of Buddha.
Yes, and not only that, but this Siddhartha met Gautama Buddha via his friend Govinda. And Govinda took him to the part of the forest where the great illuminated one was teaching. And Govinda expected Siddhartha to be, completely engrossed immediately. And after all, they were listening to the Buddha. But as you know, there have been thousands of Buddhas. We're told that by all the great, teachers of Buddhism. It's just that Gautama somehow, he's the one we talk about mainly. But the weird thing is that Siddhartha was also Gautama's name. And therefore, there's some, shall we say, some deliberate obfuscation in the work, in the novel. Quickly, the story is, and I don't care about spoiling it. As you said to me, Raghu, this is not Netflix, so we're not spoiling a series. What happens is that Siddhartha is a very enlightened and brilliant young man, becomes friendly in his tremendous friendship with Govinda. And Govinda says, look, this illuminated one, Gautama, is in the forest. We can go and see him. And they do that. And Govinda is overwhelmed And Siddhartha knows the value of the Buddha, the Gautama Buddha, but he just doesn't want to stay. And he splits. And Govinda's freaked. He's like, how could you leave this? This is one of the greatest beings ever to walk the earth, and you're walking out on him. Why? And Siddhartha, briefly put, says, I have a life to live before this. And that's indeed what much of the book is about. And it's quite counterintuitive, because it's not all about, meditation and mantras and everything. It's about Siddhartha's journey into samsara, and a journey that he knew he didn't have to take, but he took, and encounters, love and sex and drugs and rock and roll, and lives.
That's why I knew there was a reason we liked it.
Yes. And he falls in love with Kamala, who's a beautiful courtesan.
Oh, yeah.
And, enjoys a life with her to the extent that they actually make a child. But eventually he leaves her because he begins to understand that this world that he's living in, which is, I'll quote a few things just to give you an idea. He got so involved in the material world that Hesse says he sometimes dreamed of money at night. He dreamed about money. This was a person that sat with Gautama Buddha, dreamed of money. And then he got wealthy and he got skillful. And he became like a billionaire, like a good Elon Musk. Not the bad version that we've unfortunately been burdened
with.
My God. But that lasts a large part of the book. And what you see is a human being descending into a kind of extremely decadent life, lifestyle. And doesn't get out of it, really. He loves it until he hates it. And then 1 minute, it's almost like a minute. Oh my God, what am I doing? And meanwhile, Kamala gets ill, has the child, and he begins to understand that he's just wasted a whole ton of his life, according to himself. And eventually arrives back in the forest via an amazing wise man, a ferryman called Vasudeva. And we all know about Vasudeva because I guess he was Krishna's father. Mm-hmm. But in this context, he's just a ferryman. But typical of Hesse, it's so beautifully hidden that he's also a great wise teacher. And Siddhartha learns from him and eventually becomes a ferryman and does that. And they talk a lot about the river being a marvelous metaphor, an analogy, if you like, for life, because, as Heraclitus said, you never put your finger in the same water twice. Even though it's there, it's always flowing, eventually will go somewhere else, and it always doesn't. And the way Siddhartha is designed is that the flow of enlightenment was no easy thing for Siddhartha. It wasn't just a quick fix. It was an 80-year-old, forever, because it ends up where he's old. So that's Siddhartha. Why is it great? So what do you think, Raghu?
I've completely forgotten, the story. I had to. It's so amazing. And just the way you characterize it, I had to think, of course, self-reflection here. But I did meet Neem Karoli Baba, and, one could say an enlightened being, just as a general thing, a siddha. And we didn't choose, like Siddhartha chose to leave out of the forest when he was introduced to him as a young man, right?
No.
We did not, for various reasons. I mean, we were kicked out because of visa issues or what it may be, money, God knows what, how. We all did just stay there, which would have been, by the way, only, let's see, we got there 3 years.
3 years.
3 years from the time where most of us met him at first was 3 years till he left. So even that is, even without getting kicked out because of visa stuff and all that. But so what it reminded me of was suddenly we were kicked out and our lives here we go. We're not, after he left the body, there was, okay, I guess we didn't have this big imperative to go back to India because he wasn't there in a body. And we were going through all the kind of BS that people go through. Oh, a being of this nature doesn't need a body, and we can communicate with him much easier now. This was the BS because we didn't embody one iota, or for the most part, of that reality. We had no idea of what that reality is, the reality beyond the mystery, right? We had no idea. This is stuff we were being told, actually, a lot, by the Indian mentors that we had and the Indian devotees that were around. Anyhow, regardless, we had to go back into our lives. Many got married, many had children. I'm thinking of you had a child. Dreaming of money, yeah, I'm sure that went on too. And, creating a career for yourself or being able to do the things that a human incarnation is bent to do, is create a life. Now, hopefully there's enough balance in that life, and to some degree there was with us, and I speak for myself, in that, practice continued, perspective of not just this plane that we are on, is all there is, and the reality that I am not my thoughts or the story I tell myself, that perspective, which Ram Dass had a big hand in, helping us to understand the psychology of that, which was super important. Did we fall down all over the place in many ways in terms of getting caught in worldly Maya illusion? Boy. Yes. You were, and Dave was there through the whole thing, so he's privy to note that. So I just think of, and then Siddhartha, at the end of his life, goes back, right?
Oh, yes.
Goes back. Tell that part of the story, by the way.
Well, a quote here, good one, I think. Gradually there blossomed, gradually there ripened within Siddhartha the realization, the knowledge of what wisdom really was, what the goal of this long quest was. It was nothing but a preparedness of the soul, a capability, a secret art of conceiving the idea of oneness at every moment in the midst of life's activities, the ability to feel and absorb oneness. That's what Hesse wrote, this German intellectual. Whenever he wrote this, in the 20s, I guess. And that
amazing.
Says it, he says also, the things, this is very interesting about oneness, Raghu, I love this. The things, meaning everything, may be illusory. God, I got it wrong. The things may be illusory or not. If they are, I too am illusory. And so they continue to be of the same nature as myself. That is what makes them so dear and worthy of reverence to me. They share my nature. Therefore, I can love them. Remembering Ram Dass and the ugly rug. The wonderful story tells about loving a rug that was a dirty rug somewhere. And, this is...
You should tell the story. It's actually very... Do you remember the story? And it was Krishna. Eh?
I think you would be better.
Okay, just so we were together somewhere and gathered with him. I think it was very informal, actually. It wasn't at a big retreat or anything, and a gathering at his house, I suppose. And then he was talking about loving everyone, everything, not separating anything whatsoever in terms of just being at one, which is what you're speaking to, David. And look at this rug, he says. It's dirty, and it's frayed and it's awful looking, but I love this rug as much as anyone or anything that is in front of me that I can perceive. So this one of the satsang that had been with us in India, said, Ram Dass, really? I mean, you love that rug more than me? And he laughed, of course. The next thing he did was, no, he didn't do anything. What happened was the filmmaker, Mickey Lemley, who did Fierce Grace, that great film about Ram Dass and his stroke, sent him like just a 2x3 patch of filthy rug and had framed it and said, put this up on your wall. And he did. And yeah, it's all one there, and Ram Dass, but this is all, we can just bullshit ourselves into a lot of this pretty easily. And the reality is Ram Dass, I mean, he had a stroke, he was half paralyzed, he was in pain a lot of the time, but he did get to that place where he embraced everything that was in front of him. Mostly I'm speaking to people, obviously. He did love everyone, but he loved everything. I mean, he was just, he was at one. Now, he didn't, he still had stuff like that prevented him from being Neem Karoli Baba, shall we say. Like, he couldn't, he needed help. And he was like, I wrote a book, how can I help? Now I need to write a book. How can you help me? And he was always uptight about that. I mean, even to the point of helping cut a piece of food, you get a vibe from him. So he was constantly working on that and other stuff, obviously. But he really got to a place where he was engaging with everything from a loving perspective and not from this is good, this is bad perspective.
I can vouch for this because the retreats, there's a moment when people go with him and at some point maybe get a mala or something, but they would go individually. Hundreds of people in Hawaii. And I witnessed it many times. There's a different smile for everyone. And it's not some, crappy sort of TV commercial type smile. It's from the depths of Ram Dass's heart. And everybody up there, I know this from just talking to people, was very affected. You can't really call it darshan because he wouldn't call it that because he was too, he wasn't a braggadocio teacher. He was extremely aware of who he really is and in the picture. But those people loved it. And he was that love, that unconditional love, that loving awareness. And a lot of Hesse, to get back to Hesse, is it Hesse or Hesse? I never know. I think it's Hesse, right? I
think properly it would be Hesse, but I think for us in the West, Hermann Hesse is how we know it.
Maria Popova, again, pushing her, she just writes incredibly lucidly. She is a lucid genius of a writer. And so I actually took these quotes that she chose. So apologies to you, Maria, for doing that, but they're so great. One of the things that he said, this is outside of Siddhartha Raga. This is somewhere else. Because Maria's thing on marginalia is not about Siddhartha. It's about Hesse. And there are many different articles in there. We'll send you a link and you'll get to it. But one of the things she said was, it's hard to learn to suffer. Women succeed more often and more nobly than men. Learn from them. Learn to listen when the voice of life speaks. Learn to look when the sun of destiny plays with your shadows. Learn to respect life. Learn to respect yourself. From suffering springs strength. And that, again, is a parallel to non-Buddhist thought and teaching. The idea that, that joy is what you're looking for and suffering is what you're avoiding may be an idea, but it doesn't work out in life. For no one. Everybody loses somebody. Everybody loses a lot, actually. And those moments of loss are the most difficult to deal with. And it's the most difficult to imagine that a Buddhist master or a Mahasiddha like Maharaj in Karoli would say this, and it would be the depth of their truth. It would be the most crucial thing to learn is that, you're going to suffer and you cannot just avoid it, and you shouldn't spend a life.
That's what he said. Suffering brings me closer to God.
And I mean, there are other things here. One thing he said, solitude is not chosen any more than destiny is chosen. Solitude comes to us if we have within us the magic stone that attracts destiny, meaning the inner life and the realizations of the inner life really, really do trump, excuse the word, but they really do trump the other stuff if you're really doing it. And, I'm a meditator, I wouldn't say I was the most prolific one. I try to do it every day. And what I've noticed in my recent latter years is that the thoughts that constantly come in, people think meditation is some bliss state you're going to be, well, maybe. But for me, after God knows how many years, 52 years since starting with, Werner Erhard and Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, in the 60s, I learned to meditate from those two men. And I met them both. And I've been doing it my whole life. But when I meditated this morning, a lot of thoughts were coming in, a lot of thoughts after God knows how many years. Well, that proves is that I'm not maybe as ardent a meditator as some people are, but I'm pretty typical, I think. And again, what Hesse sort of understood in a very lonely way. Think about where he was living, Germany and Switzerland in the 20s and 30s. There was a little thing called Nazism going on at that time. So think of we think it's divisive in this country now, and it is. But at that time, it wasn't just divisive, it was lethal division. And he obviously experienced that, as did Rudolf Steiner, as did Albert Einstein. These men, and there were women, of course, too, had to leave the country because it was so absolutely oppressive beyond description. And so that suffering is, I believe, I'd like to know what Maria Popova knows about this. I believe that suffering, that terrible feeling that the country had gone to hell, not a metaphorical hell, real hell, concentration camps, etc., etc. That subliminally became kind of an inspiration for him to find a place that was beyond all of that, as hard as that is even to imagine. He did. And that's why he became so popular in the 60s, Raghu. I think the zeitgeist thing is that in the 60s, we were all happy and, tripping and listening to, the Dead, and well, maybe not the Dead with you and me, but certainly the Stones and Dylan and Joni Mitchell and so forth.
Hey, I liked the Dead back then, okay? I'm not going to get any mail about the Dead, okay?
No, I love the Dead. We love the Dead. And we love the others. We love the Dead and Company. But behind that joy and that trippy feeling and dancing and singing and feeling so liberated, there was a thing called the Vietnam War, which was absolutely pervasive in our lives every day.
As pervasive as what's going on now in our lives.
It's
without social media.
Yeah, without social media, but with Walter Cronkite. That's what we had.
Yeah, right.
And even he, as a neutral observer, was part of the reason the war ended, they say, apart from the protests and the amount of... But the two were going hand in hand. Joy, realization, tripping, the Rolling Stones, napalm. That's what was happening to Hermann Hesse, I believe.
He talked...
Yes.
God, I wish I would have held that. Maybe you can find this quote where he talked about what was happening in Germany with Hitler and the legions of people who were supporting what he called anti-democratic revolution.
Oh, yes.
Right? And he was, he became a pacifist, of course, after the First World War.
Yes.
And but the way he speaks to it is kind of eerie, given the way we're being spoken to in these times. Hey, let me say one thing, because everybody out there, in relation to Ram Dass, I mean, he's brought up so much, and probably every. I mean, not every, but most of the podcast episodes we've done over the years, David and I, and what I've done on my own the last few years. And there's a reason for that. It just comes to me when, David, you're describing how Hesse is contextualizing exactly what you're speaking to, which is how to deal with, which is what Siddhartha is about, dealing with the worldly life that we as incarnates, as humans, have to engage with, yet how to, as Ram Dass put it, live on more than one plane of consciousness at the same time. And that's what he was searching for, and it's kind of what we were searching for. And that's what I was trying to say earlier. And I guess I bring up Ram Dass because both David and I actually experienced, being with him a lot, we experienced somebody who did harmonize these two planes of consciousness, and it's rare. And so, when you want to talk about, bring up an example of it, it seems to be, yes, it's easy because of, how well we knew him, but at the same time, he really did achieve that. That story of the rug is real. He did get to that place. So I guess I'm not saying it's an apology for constantly bringing up Ram Dass, because obviously there wouldn't be this network, Be Here Now network, without Ram Dass.
No, he's totally crucial. But, it goes all the way from that great, love of Maharaji and bringing back so much of that teaching and the darshan of it so many times. But then there was the other thing, that I was going through a terrible period of my life in 1979. Terrible. And
79. What were we doing?
Well, Ram Dass was at the Hanuman Foundation uptown in Manhattan at the time. And I was also living on the Upper West Side, and I actually called him up and said that I was having a real problem dealing with my particular situation of what it was, divorce and so on. And he just said, "Oh, the phone stinks. I'll never forget this. Just come on over now."
Really?
I walked up 20 blocks and went to where he was. And I sat at a table with him within like 18 inches from my face at all times. And he just made me laugh. And he knew the situation. And he just helped me. I mean, when I left and I walked back at midnight, I remember, in the dark on the Upper West Side, which at that time was more known for heroin than for spirituality. And by the time I got to our apartment, I was feeling so much better, because if he looked at you and said something, it really went deep. No matter how flippant he might appear to be occasionally, and funny, he was a very witty man, it just went deep. And that was my personal experience of being helped by someone who was a clinical psychologist at Harvard, but that was nothing to do with it. It was just all love. And the fact that he'd seen me very happy in my life, and he now saw a person that was kind of a bit of a shadow of himself, and he brought me back. So I have a personal love for him, apart from just loving his mind and his influence and everything. He helped me, We were talking, last podcast I did with you, Raghu, was about Aldous Huxley. And remember the thing where in his later years, after doing various substances and whatever, he couldn't look at anything without saying, "How curious, how wonderful that is." And it might be a dirty rug again, but it wasn't in this case. It might be a beautiful insect, or just a beautiful pattern work on a blanket, or whatever. Huxley would be like that. And Hesse says this about that: "While wandering down the path of wonder, I briefly escape the world of separation and enter the world of unity." Again, it's that oneness. It's not a philosophy. It's a cosmic grasp. It's very hard, because this computer doesn't appear to be part of me. This pen does not appear to be part of me. But that's not the ultimate sort of vision. I mean, we're seeing politically and socially now in the United States the absolute apotheosis of nasty separation, of nasty, mean, cruel, and disgusting divisiveness designed by people. And yet at the same time, and I maintain this, and I know you agree with me, there's never been a time when young people have been so hip to the ecology, to yoga, to many things that we may have started in some sense in the 60s, but now people are much more. So alongside the really questionable behavior of politicians, to say the least, and that's a euphemism, the criminal behavior of politicians, there's also a strand which has grasped this world that Hesse and the Mahasiddhas and the Buddhists and some of the really sincere Kabbalists and Islamists, every religion that really can boil down to a spiritual path rather than, a middleman telling you how to think, how to live, how to, it's not that. It's coming to it yourself. And I think that Hesse was such a major figure in the 60s because he did that. When I first read it, I was 20. I was 20. And I got it, but I'd never read anything like that before in my life. Never. I'd never read a book about.
Yeah. Now it's like, there's a gazillion books out there right now. But
every time you open Facebook, you're going to find someone who's just written a book about to help you get out of your shit, no matter what. And I'm a little bit cagey about that because everybody's got an opinion, and that's good. Everybody's a director, everybody's an actor, but there are some good books out there that help. And Hesse's novels created for me a world that I aspired to, but I didn't understand in any way at that time in the 60s. It just fitted in with the flashes of wisdom that would come with an acid trip or whatever, or just talking to someone who'd been through a psychedelic experience. That happened then with Hesse and with others. There were others, there were plenty of us. In fact, did I make a list somewhere? I made a list somewhere. There were people like Aldous Huxley, Timothy Leary, Shirley MacLaine, strange name to bring up here. A woman that I knew her, and she was an absolutely sincere seeker. Nothing showbiz about that when you talk to her at length. I wish I did. I was so amazed.
She's still with us, right?
Yes, she's still with us. She's in her 80s. She's great. And she was another thing in the 60s. All kinds of strange things were part of this brew, as Crean called it, strange brew. A strange brew.
Yeah.
Great artists, great writers from the past. People like William James from the 19th century who started, really started studying the psyche in a real scientific way. All these people figured.
And psychedelics.
Yeah. So Hesse, you came out with Huxley, and if you remember, I was a bit like, Aldous Huxley, okay. Are we still thinking about, well, we should be, because these were the precursors. They were the precursors. Now, they were intellectuals and writers, but they had that bhav, as they say. They had that bhav. They knew the sacredness of Om, because another quote, which I should throw upon you because I've written them down, is he said in Siddhartha, Siddhartha breathed the air of samsara. Again.
Illusion, samsara, illusion.
Samsara, illusion. Again, he was old and tired. Again, he felt the disgust. Again, he felt the wish to obliterate himself. Again, he recovered thanks to the sacred Om. Now, here's a guy in 1920 whatever talking about Om. I certainly didn't come across that word until I met all these geezers from India.
No, you did. You went to the Hare Krishna Center for.
That's true.
Prasad lunch.
I filmed them actually. I did a film with the Hare Krishnas in downtown New York, and it was very exciting actually. Never been in a room with people like that, but
probably still.
But I think that you can't tell people read this, read that. People's lives are complex and dense, and But if there's ever something you want to read that will actually stimulate every level, every chakra, everyone, read Hesse's Magister Ludi or Steppenwolf, which is really about Jung's shadow.
Yes.
The concept that we all have a wolf in us. And we're not talking about a 50s thing where men chased women, talking about a wolf, a biter. And it was very into that, of discovering what were the dark parts of our psyche and how do you take the train from them to the soul. And I can't tell you how
Hey,
passionate
I got a quote. Can I read? I found a quote of him that I really love. No, I don't know where it's from or anything.
Hit us with it. Hit us. What?
You are only afraid if you are not in harmony with yourself. People are afraid because they have never owned up to themselves. That is so great. I mean, actually, I'm going to bring up Ram Dass again, because when I read this quote, a long time ago, David and I were in Hawaii with Ram Dass, Maui, and somehow he and I decided, you know, truth is such an important, plays such an important part in everything Ram Dass has been teaching about over the years and talks about and so on. Let's ask him about it. But we put it in it wasn't truth. It was like the catchword was honesty, which I liked and I like now. And it was, you know, when Hesse talks about it, because they're afraid because they've never owned up to themselves. How about we all take a look at ourselves? And, you know, the way in which we bullshit ourselves is extraordinary. And we don't fess up because we're protecting what we want, either to keep going or to defend ourselves or whatever it may be. And that's what, you know, and he, of course, Ram Dass, was extraordinarily well-spoken around being honest with oneself. David just sent me the transcript of this exchange that we had with him, which hasn't seen the light of day, and it should. But that reality that Hess is speaking to to me, goes a long, long way to reveal the polarization that, David, you were just speaking to in this country, in the world, really. I mean, this seems to be happening one country after the other. The kind of polarization and separateness and divisiveness that's there. You got to start with, you know, as he said, if you're out of harmony with yourself, there's no chance at all of even putting one foot in front of the other to help create harmony in your family, in your local community, and just expressing whatever we can express out in the world. It's impossible without that. So anyhow, that was a great quote.
Yeah, I mean, there's a veil already over us, our distance from realization, but the extra veil of political and social, you know, skullduggery, you know, that's what we see now.
Yeah.
And very, very depressing in a way. But on the other hand, if you try and look at it in the larger, you know, cycles of human design of societies, you know, we are not apparently in the Kali Yuga anymore, but we're in the entrails. I think they call them the Sandis. We're in the entrails of the Kali Yuga, and there's still very bad stuff going on in the world, and it seems like it has to reach a peak in order to, you know, to sort of cleanse the world.
Mm-hmm. No, what that's going to entail may not be fun.
No, it's not fun now, is it? I mean, Gaza, you know, I mean, I was in Gaza for a few weeks filming in 1989. And to give you an idea, there was an intifada, meant the resistance that the Palestinians created at odd times. And this was the second intifada. And, you know, we were driving around in a Land Rover and looking at different parts of the West Bank and everything. And then I was asked by a Palestinian politician, the mayor of Hebron, go to Gaza, take a crew there. If you want to see what's really going on, go there and be careful. So we went there, the four of us, and it was beyond anything I could ever imagine, never mind have seen, empirically seen. My imagination couldn't have conjured up the horror that I saw every day. I went to the hospitals. I went to the orphanages. We went all over. And we were all, the camera operator was a whatever you call it, a 7-degree black belt karate guy.
Really?
I remember very well. I mean, I thought we were protected. And when we came out of the orphanage in Ramallah, which is not in Gaza, but is in the West Bank, he cried. I've never seen a cameraman cry. Even at a bad rock concert. You know, he just was overwhelmed with grief, really. And that was 30 years ago, 35 years ago. And when I came back, we were supposed to put this on public television. And the response we got was, no way are we putting this on television. Ever. That's public television. That wasn't Fox. It wasn't, you know, in other words, the world didn't even want to know what reporters, and I'm not really a reporter, but I was at that time, in Gaza. And when we told them what we'd seen, and we were almost crying then, just talking about it, nobody listened. And they're still not listening because of that, what Raghu was just talking about, that lack of honesty, that lack of being able to go to yourself and maybe make incredibly counterintuitive decisions based upon the truth rather than upon your predilections and background. This is what, you know, this is what Ram Dass, I mean, I'm honored to be in anything involving Ram Dass, because so many times in my life, I've seen people come to him. I mean, not physically, but discover him either through a proxy or like my friend who I talked about it to until she was completely absorbed in him. It was the essential ability to help people come to their core, their heart core, and find out whether they were living a life that was helpful, altruistic, all of those things, as well as being joyous. And without Ram Dass, I don't think I could have actually achieved much of that, because it's all very well to hear it from incredible teachers and beings in India and in Southeast Asia and so forth, Thich Nhat Hanh and many others, great Buddhist teachers. And I think, Raghu, you want to talk about that in a minute. Let's get to
yeah. Yeah, you're reminding me, We've
incredible Rinpoche,
Yeah. I wanted to share with everybody, and also, of course, with David. I sent him a picture from where I was, which is at
gorgeous,
an ashram in Arizona that had one incredible Tibetan Lama named Garchen, Garchen, Rinpoche, and just situated the most beautiful place, very remote place in Arizona. I mean, the picture I sent you, David, it showed these beautiful mountains, and then above them was a snow-capped mountain, which I never imagined. It was in May, that I would ever see anything like that. I mean, there was a lot of rain and snow. I had met this Lama 20 years ago. I got fortunate, actually through Sharon Salzberg, introduced me to somebody who was hosting him while he was giving a retreat. So this Rinpoche was taken by the Chinese as a young man and put in prison for 20 years. During that time in prison, he met his guru and got teachings. And so then finally escaped, I guess he was let out. I don't remember the exact story, but he was let out, and then he escaped over the mountains to India. And he started coming to give teachings. And so that's where I met him. It was in California, and I said, what can I do? And she said, well, we need somebody to drive him back and forth to the retreat center, from the retreat center to my house, she said. I said, okay, well, I'd love to do that. So I actually spent time with him. The translator wasn't in the car whenever we go back and forth. So it was really interesting. I mean, any kind of, rapport. The rapport was beyond the words, obviously. I mean, a few words were fine. Anyhow, the highlight of that particular time was that actually, David, this is when we had Triloka Records, right? And Jeff Beal did a record with Nawang Ketchog.
Oh, God, that record.
The flute, Tibet Cry of the Snow Lion.
Yes.
And it was about the horror that was going on in Tibet 10 years before that. Immolations, the monks were immolating themselves in protest. They were burning all of the temples and they were burning the books. I mean, it was extraordinary how bad it was. So I said I'd like to show, and so we were part of this film because we did the soundtrack. And I said, can I show you this film? And he said, yeah. And there was a translator in the room at the time, so some of it was translated to us from Tibetan, so he caught most of it. I have never seen somebody simultaneously expressing the deepest sorrow and suffering and at the same time forgiveness. You could see it in his face. It was it was an extraordinary experience. So fast forward 20 years, 22 years probably, a good friend of ours, David and I, Krishna Das, who goes around chanting. Many of you know him. Yeah. He was invited to do to be part of the retreat that this Rinpoche was running around compassion and love in Arizona. So Krishna said, you must come, and you'll want to see him. You haven't seen him in all these years. And so I did. First of all, very unusual for a Tibetan Lama to host a Kirtan Bhakti guy at a retreat like this. All right? It was very unusual. But as you'll hear from some of what happened, because so every day he'd give teachings, Garchen Rinpoche, right? And I just got to frame this a little bit because it has to do with how this struck me so powerfully, was the fact that many of you know Duncan Trussell, you probably know because although we haven't talked about it in the last little bit, we put out a book called The Movie of Me to the Movie of We, which was, just basic perspective on the way that we are self-grasping and everything revolves around the me, that I that we carry around in our head. And the stories we tell ourselves, well, how to transform that is really what the book is about, using Duncan and myself as examples. Anyhow, so that's the context. I'm sitting there, and he starts talking about the concept of me, and these are notes that we took, leads to problem of self and others. And it was like just a simple statement, but it just was so relevant to what's going on now, with the way that we are just grasping at that self, either through defense mechanisms or through ego of I am a something, whatever you may be. I am a podcaster, and I am this, and I am that, and the way that this divisiveness extends from that concept. He just put it so powerfully. First of all, he said, by the way, it's very difficult to find a precious human body You absolutely, and I've been told this before by other actually Rinpoches. Kalu Rinpoche said, it's not that often, and you're going to get one of these bodies. And by the way, you better, take care of it, because it's the only way to become free of fear, anxiety, separation, isolation, all of the stuff that is so difficult as humans for us to process. And this suffering, and he went on to say, this suffering is about self-grasping. Now, it's not even it's no esoteric term. I mean, the reality is how we see ourselves on a day-to-day basis. That's why Ram Dass, again, here we go, loving awareness, get out of your head and that story you tell yourself, and it's all based on your neurotic tendencies and habitual patterns, and get into the heart space, where that's what you are, right? Your identification, if you just move it into that space, the whole world changes. And what did Garchen say in that moment? All sentient beings have the seed of Buddha nature. We've all got that place that's behind what we normally think is us, which is the mind that says, I am this, I am that, I need this, I need that, right? Mm-hmm. So I went, wow, this is what we were trying to, extrapolate around the movie of me thing that we did. I actually called Duncan after this particular talk, and I said, shit, we were on the right track, Duncan. We just may not, we're not Rinpoches, unfortunately, and we're not able to express it in the way that, I was just blown away. So the other thing, by the way, Dave, it's in big, bold, I see it here, the need to understand karma. Without that understanding, you can't accomplish meaning in this life. And underlined all of it is understanding love. And I will put a word in front of it, unconditional love, which is what, we received when we met Neem Karoli Baba. So understanding karma, that's we need to do and ask the experts around karma. And we didn't we do something with Robert Svoboda? Do you remember doing that? The law of karma?
You did it. I listened to it. It was great.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I thought you might have been there.
No, I wasn't.
And here's one last image that I'll share with, because it's so phenomenal. So he calls the concept of me, the ego me, the I. He said, think of it like an ice block, right? Like a block of ice. Grasping, the self-grasping is like a block of ice. And then what melts that block of ice is practice. That's what he was passing practices, right? Once you start to do these practices and realize that what needs to be cultivated, so the block starts to melt. As it melts, you get the idea that we've got to do something for our fellow men. Start with, the people closest to you, and then extend it out beyond them to cultivate an altruistic mind. You need preliminary practices until you're able to not think constantly of yourself. Then after, you'll get into the real practice. All right. So this is just where we should start, and eventually the unconditionality of love becomes our central theme, and we are no longer in separation. And here, what did Hesse say? If you hate a person, you hate something in him that is part of yourself. What isn't part of ourselves doesn't disturb us. How about that for a great quote, right? What isn't part of ourselves, that self-grasping is gone. And it's just complete transparency. We need to be transparent with ourselves. I think that's the
and of course
bottom line.
Sorry, that leads to the concept of non-judgmental practice. That if you believe, apart from this moment that comes up when you're not believing it, that there is a unity in the cosmos, not just in America or but the whole thing. The law of one is a real law, and that the problem is that you forget it. You just forget it. And then you get angry at stuff. I mean, I'm particularly subject sometimes. I mean, thank goodness I live with someone who can say to me, David, please just change the channel. Because I'm looking at something else we've all done in the last 8 years. It's something that we can't believe is happening. It is so grotesque. And the trick is then, just a little anecdote on that. There are 2 people in my life. They're not the closest people to me, but they're people that I know, who told me recently that they were absolutely Trump followers. It shook me to the core, particularly with one of these people, to the core. I remember standing in the street when she told me this, and I had a Bhagavad Gita battle in my brain and in my heart for about probably a minute before I responded. What I wanted to say was, what? And I'm looking at it. And instead of that, I said, different strokes, and departed. And that was a big thing for me because I'm a debater. I was trained as a debater in England, and
yeah,
very nice person, but when I'm debating, I can be really quite hideous. And I wanted to immediately say to her, let's talk about this. You know what you're supporting here? You are a woman you're a Latina. Have you heard what he said about Mexicans? But I didn't, because I knew that would be to no avail. That was really the reason. But underneath that, when I walked away and went back home, I thought, you've changed, Dave. Because there would have been a time when you would have just engaged in a pretty horrific, angry response to that. You would have. You wouldn't have left that person until you'd at least made an impression that she was an idiot. And these are the moments when you really become to terms with this stuff. When in the times we're living in are divisive, some grotesque and awful stuff is happening. It's always been happening, but it seems to be amplified now by social media and the amount of communications we get about it. Or when the Crimean War was happening in 1860, whenever it was, the British people did not know anything about what was happening in Crimea. Nothing, except what the Times of London would tell them. Now we know everything. We're getting all the info from Stormy and from this and that and everything. We're getting it, we're listening to it. And it's very hard to be non-judgmental about it. Because you think, well, if a person believes that, she's dangerous. But the truth of the matter is that's not really where it's at all, is it? Because her karma somehow has brought her to that place. And to argue someone out of the actuality of their karma is rubbish. What you've got to do is do it by example, really. And I mean, I'm saying this, although I don't really act it out some of the time. The other person I know who's a Trump follower, I did the same thing. I just sat in his car for a minute, and he told me that he really loved Trump. And I just had to, there was a battle going on inside of me instantaneously about, should I just tell him he's completely wrong and this is stupid and dangerous? Or should I do what I actually did, which was say, interesting. That's all I could say. Because I've come to that point in my life and I understand that kind of instantaneous conflict, which you bring about with yourself all the time, arguing with people and arguing, discussing and debating, you're wrong, I'm right, you're right, I'm wrong. It's all pretty damn pointless in the end. Because what you've really got to be interested in is that person's karma and your karma. There's an expression, I think it's called, it's like Ranana karma. It's like that. It's a word.
Oh yeah, Ranuna. Yeah. It's a very difficult word. It's impossible to pronounce. Yeah,
it's totally impossible. But I came across it in something, and it really meant something to me because it was like there's a collective karma here, and the karma of all of you is what's it's what's, going round and round and round right now. Not it's yours, but everybody's. And at that point, you have to realize that what you consider to be the truth may be the truth, but your ability to deal with someone who doesn't agree with you about that will show you where your karma's at.
Yeah,
not
exactly. Here's another Hesse thing.
I said that because I'm so judgmental.
Yeah. Here's another Hesse thing. It is not our purpose to become each other. It is to recognize each other, to learn to see the other and honor him for what he is. They would be a better pronoun, but yeah. So he was right there. That speaks to exactly what's going on here, exactly what you're
well,
talking
as you said
about.
before, Raghu, I mean, the circumstances were eerily similar. The Weimar Republic, and if you want to know what I think about this, check the movie The Garden of the Finzi Concinis. The Garden of the Finzi Concinis.
Finzi Concini? I never heard of such a thing.
It's a movie, a brilliant movie made about 25, 30 years ago, about a wonderful family living in, I don't know, Munich or Frankfurt or something. And meanwhile, the whole thing is happening. The whole thing is happening.
You mean the Second World War?
Yeah. The Nazis are walking through the streets. They're throwing, stones into Jewish buildings and so on. And the movie's about the lack of ability to see what was right in front of them, because they loved the comfort zone. They loved it. And they didn't want it even in theory attacked. And I mean, the great Pema Chodron, in her lectures about dealing with death and loss, which I recommend on Sounds True, I went through the whole 10-hour thing with her. And one of the things, online, and one of the things she says repeatedly is, if you're not willing to come out of your comfort zone on any level, mental, heart, whatever chakra that's in, you're not going to progress. And it's a hard thing to hear, because, I love, sitting in front of the telly, with a decent cup of coffee and a really great new Netflix series to binge on. Those are comfortable moments, and you can't say that they're wrong or right or anything. It's just what Pepper's saying. What great philosophers and teachers and siddhas have said, that sometimes you really have to leave that place and imagine what it's like for other people who are not in that place. I have a small anecdote. I did a movie in 2001 with the Mormons in Utah. And it was actually a very good experience. It wasn't a bad experience at all. It was lovely. And then one of the producers came to New York a month or two later, and we were standing somewhere in the West Village, and a homeless person was standing right there. And Randy, he's called Randy Blossel, he said, "We must help that man." Now, as a New Yorker, that's not the general
rule of thumb
response, it just isn't. It's like, oh, I feel sorry, let me move on. And Randy took the guy and took him to dinner. Not small dinner, but pizza dinner, spaghetti. We all sat there with this very, very humbled person. And I saw this person of the Mormon persuasion totally throw himself into whatever he could do for this individual. And it taught me two things. One is, don't put down religions you don't know anything about. And I mean, I'm not particularly attracted to Mormonism, but I saw a Mormon person do something of great strength and kindness. And it blew me away. That whole moment in 2001, because I saw it in action where I wouldn't have done that. I was kind of ashamed. I saw him do it. I thought, would I have done that? No, I probably wouldn't have taken him into the restaurant and all that.
Yeah.
I mean, it does involve, but again, on a greater level, it also involves trying to understand why the people that we're really disgusted by are acting the way they are and how to react to them. And
well, here we go. This is a perfect spot to end our podcast. And I'm going back to Garchen Rinpoche because somebody asked him. So there was a Q&A after he gave his talk. Someone said, really, I mean, he said, one of the things he said is cultivate love and self-grasping leaves, and happiness enters. So someone said, well, what is true love? Right? He said, true love means feel love for all sentient beings. And they said, well, okay, like that may be pretty hard for me to get to. I got all this bullshit in my head and feeling less than and impurities. And so, well, how do you purify all that? And basically, he said this truism, which has been repeated to us over and over by all of the same guru. There's only one of these beings, really, and was repeated by the Beatles. All you need is love. All you need is love. I mean, and it sounds so simplistic, but the reality is, like this person you were with, Randy's his name, who just instinctively went to do the right thing, and he had that feeling. Who cares what religion? I mean, there's only, as His Holiness said, my only religion is kindness. And that's really what this is all about. And that's why this Rinpoche was so fabulous. There wasn't esoteric. I mean, there was a few esoteric teachings, of course, but it was really about just get out of yourself, that self that is who you identify with, and, assume an altruistic perspective. Period. And, that's why Ram Dass's thing, loving awareness, was so great in all those years that we were with him.
Coupled with becoming nobody.
Yeah. Coupled with becoming nobody. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Go together.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for being here.
Pleasure.
My beloved. Great. Yeah. It's really great.
Enjoyed doing this.
Yeah.
We did, actually.
Yeah. And we'll have all those links. Hermann Hesse.
Yes.
And we'll figure out how to pronounce it one of these days. The experts will actually get in touch with some experts.
Yes, and you should check Marginalia, the website.
Yeah, we'll get. Let's get a link, guys, who do the show notes. Marginalia and Maria Popova.
Yes,
because she's done with brain pickings and this extraordinary stuff that introducing to people, and this is like reintroducing Hermann Hesse. And you heard some of those quotes. They're so relevant to us right now. And that book, Siddhartha, is the one to go to first.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So, and I don't know, whatever else you guys that were producing this, notice that there should be a nice link to. Garchen Rinpoche would be one, because people can join him in these retreats, and you just got to follow, or just put your email into their newsletter. And last but not least, in my own and Duncan Trussell's self-interest, get the movie of me to the movie of we. We were on the right wavelength. I feel good about that. And you can get that on wherever you get audible.com or Apple or Google, Amazon rather. I will see you next week, Dave. I will see you sooner than that. And everybody out there, go to BeHereNowNetwork.com/mindrolling and pick up all the links here to enrich our lives, we hope. And check out all of the podcasters. Everybody, I'm coming soon to a Be Here Now, wherever you pick up your podcasts near you, Krishnamurti. We have them all now. Ram Dass, Alan Watts, Krishnamurti. I mean, we're happening. So there you go, everybody. Great to be with you, Dave. We'll see you next time.
Yes, thank you.